The giant chamber buzzed with noise as hundreds of alien beings filled the seats. The Galactic Council was meeting again, and as always, trouble was brewing. Species from across the galaxy had come to argue, complain, and make demands. Some looked like giant bugs, others like walking trees, and some were just floating balls of light. But they all had one thing in common: they loved to talk. Ambassador Jake Harrison walked into the chamber with his usual calm smile. Behind him came his assistant Lisa Martinez, carrying a thick folder of papers. She always looked serious, but today she seemed extra focused. Admiral Ben Carter followed them, wearing his fancy military uniform with all the shiny medals. He never spoke during these meetings, but the humans always brought him anyway. The three humans took their seats in the middle section, right where everyone could see them. Jake straightened his tie and opened his folder. Lisa set up her recording device and got ready to take notes. Ben sat perfectly still, his hands folded on his lap, watching everything with quiet eyes. "The council will now come to order," announced Elder Zorith, the ancient alien who ran these meetings. He looked like a tall, thin person covered in silver scales, with eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. Zorith had been running council meetings for over 200 years, and he had seen many species come and go. But the humans were different. They had been coming to these meetings for 50 years, and they never got angry. They never shouted. They never even raised their voices. This made some of the other species think humans were weak. The first speaker was Crixtel, the representative from the Zeltharian Empire. He stood up on his forelegs and clicked his claws together. The Zeltharians looked like giant crabs, but they wore fancy robes and thought they were very important. Crixtel's voice was harsh and loud. "The human expansion into the outer rim systems must stop," he declared. "These worlds have been claimed by the Zeltharian Empire for generations. The humans have no right to build colonies there." Jake Harrison stood up slowly. His voice was calm and friendly, like he was talking to an old friend. "Thank you, Delegate Crixtel. We appreciate your concerns. However, our surveys show these systems were uninhabited when we arrived. We have followed all council protocols for establishing new colonies. We have filed the proper paperwork and waited the required time periods." Crixtel's claws clicked angrily. "Paperwork means nothing. Those systems belong to us. Perhaps we could discuss a compromise," Jake suggested. "We could share the systems or establish trade agreements that benefit both our peoples." Some of the other delegates made sounds that might have been laughter. They thought Jake was being weak again, giving in too easily. But Lisa Martinez watched her boss carefully. She had worked with him for 10 years, and she knew that look in his eyes. Jake was not being weak. He was being patient. There was a difference, but most aliens could not see it. Next came Sethkar, the representative from the Vorthak hegemony. The Vorthaks looked like giant lizards that walked on two legs. They had sharp teeth and loved to fight. Sethkar's voice was a low hiss. "The human military is pathetic," he said. "Your ships are small and weak. Your weapons are primitive. Why should the council listen to a species that cannot even defend itself?" Admiral Ben Carter's jaw tightened just a little bit. Lisa noticed, but she doubted anyone else did. Ben had been a soldier for 30 years before becoming a diplomat. He had fought in wars that the council knew nothing about, wars that humanity had won. Jake's smile never changed. "The Vorthak people are known for their strength," he said. "We have great respect for your military traditions. However, we believe that diplomacy is often more effective than force. We prefer to solve problems by talking." Sethkar made a sound like a snake laughing. "Talking is for the weak. The strong take what they want." "An interesting philosophy," Jake replied. "We'll certainly consider your perspective." The meeting continued for hours. Delegate after delegate stood up to complain about humanity. The Chithrex Collective, who looked like a swarm of flying insects, claimed that human technology was stolen from other species. The Morphic Coalition said that human art was ugly and should be banned. The crystal entities complained that human music was too loud. Through it all, Jake Harrison remained calm. He thanked each speaker for their input. He promised to consider their concerns. He suggested compromises and offered to meet privately to discuss solutions. He never got angry. He never raised his voice. He never threatened anyone. Lisa Martinez took careful notes, but she also watched the other delegates. She could see the frustration in their faces. They wanted the humans to get angry. They wanted them to shout back. They wanted them to act like all the other species in the council, emotional, quick to anger, ready to fight. But the humans never gave them that satisfaction. Elder Zorith watched everything from his high chair at the front of the chamber. He was old, older than any other being in the council. He had seen the rise and fall of many civilizations. He had watched species destroy themselves with anger and pride. But he had also seen something else, something that made him uneasy. He had seen species that were too calm, too controlled. In his long life, he had learned that the most dangerous predators were often the ones that appeared most peaceful. The humans worried him. They had appeared in the galaxy 50 years ago, friendly and eager to join the galactic community. They had amazing technology, but they claimed it was all for peaceful purposes. They had powerful ships, but they used them only for exploration and trade. They had weapons, but they never used them except in self-defense. They were always polite, always diplomatic, always reasonable. But Zorith remembered the old stories. Stories of species that seemed gentle until they were pushed too far. Stories of civilizations that appeared weak until they decided to show their true strength. The humans reminded him of those stories. As the meeting dragged on, more and more, delegates spoke against humanity. They questioned human motives. They challenged human claims. They insulted human culture. Through it all, the three humans sat quietly, listening to every word. Finally, Buzzik of the Chithrex Collective stood up. The insect-like being's voice was a high-pitched buzzing sound. "The humans are weak," he declared. "They let everyone walk over them. They make no demands. They threaten no one. They are not worthy of the space they occupy in this galaxy." The chamber fell silent. Even by council standards, this was a serious insult. To question a species' right to exist was crossing a line that few delegates dared to cross. Jake Harrison stood up slowly. His smile was still there, but something had changed. Lisa could see it. Ben could see it. Even some of the other delegates could sense it. The air in the chamber seemed to grow colder. "Thank you, Buzzik," Jake said, his voice as calm as ever. "Your opinion is noted and will be passed along to our government." He sat down without saying anything else. The meeting continued, but the mood had shifted. Something was different about the humans now. They were still polite, still diplomatic, still reasonable. But there was something else there, something that had not been there before. Elder Zorith felt a chill run through his ancient body. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of predators who had decided that the time for games was over. The humans were still smiling, still being polite, but something fundamental had changed. The meeting ended with the usual diplomatic language about considering all perspectives and working toward solutions. The delegates began to file out, chattering among themselves about human weakness and the need for stronger leadership in the galaxy. But Elder Zorith remained in his chair, watching the three humans as they gathered their papers and prepared to leave. They moved with the same calm efficiency they always showed, but now he could see what he had missed before. They moved like soldiers, like warriors who had been pretending to be diplomats. As the humans reached the door, Jake Harrison turned back and caught Zorith's eye. For just a moment, the diplomatic mask slipped, and Zorith saw something that made his blood freeze. In Jake's eyes was the cold, patient calculation of a predator that had been playing with its food for far too long. Then the mask was back, and Jake smiled his diplomatic smile. "Good day, Elder Zorith," he said politely. "We look forward to the next session." The humans left, and Zorith sat alone in the empty chamber, wondering what he had just witnessed. Something told him that the next council meeting would be very different from this one. 3 months had passed since the last council meeting, and things in space had gotten much worse. Human colonies in the disputed star systems were reporting serious problems almost every day. Ships carrying supplies to the colonies were disappearing without a trace. Mining stations were being sabotaged in the middle of the night. Civilian transport vessels were being stopped and searched by aggressive alien patrols who seemed to be looking for any excuse to cause trouble. Lisa Martinez sat in her office on Earth, reading through stack after stack of incident reports. Each report told the same story. Human civilians were being harassed, threatened, and attacked by alien forces. The Vorthak ships were the worst, attacking unarmed human vessels and claiming they were defending their territory. The Zeltharian patrols were almost as bad, boarding human ships and confiscating cargo for no good reason. She looked up as Jake Harrison walked into the office. He looked tired, which was unusual for him. Jake always seemed calm and in control, but lately the stress was starting to show. "How bad is it?" he asked, sitting down across from her desk. Lisa picked up the latest report. The cargo ship Morning Star was attacked yesterday near the Beta 7 system. 3 crew members were killed. The Vorthaks claim the ship was carrying weapons, but the manifest shows it was only carrying food and medical supplies. Jake closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead. "Any survivors?" 2. They're in the hospital on New Geneva Station. The doctors say they'll recover, but they're pretty shaken up. Jake opened his eyes and looked at her. "What's the total count now?" Lisa consulted her tablet. 47 ships attacked or missing in the last 3 months. 138 people dead or missing. Property damage estimated at over 2 billion credits. Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was very soft. "Have you talked to your sister lately?" Lisa smiled a little. Her younger sister Helen was a scientist working on one of the research ships in the outer systems. "She called last week. She's excited about some new discovery they made. Something about ancient alien ruins on one of the moons. Tell her to be careful out there," Jake said. "Things are getting dangerous." "I will," Lisa promised. "But you know Helen. She thinks her research is the most important thing in the universe. It's hard to get her to worry about anything else." The next day, Jake and his team were on a ship heading back to the council station. The emergency session had been called after the latest attacks, and the human delegation was bringing a mountain of evidence to present to the other species. Admiral Ben Carter sat across from Jake in the ship's meeting room, reviewing tactical reports on his tablet. He looked up as Jake entered. "The latest intelligence reports are not good," Ben said. "Our deep space monitoring stations are picking up increased Vorthak fleet movements. They're massing ships near the border systems." "How many ships?" Jake asked. "At least 50 heavy cruisers plus support vessels. That's enough firepower to wipe out all our colonies in that sector." Jake sat down and looked at the star charts displayed on the wall screen. The red dots showing Vorthak positions were getting closer to the blue dots showing human colonies. "What about the Zeltharians?" "They're being more subtle," Ben replied. "They're using economic warfare instead of direct attacks. They've convinced several neutral species to stop trading with our colonies. They're also spreading rumors that human technology is dangerous and unstable." "And the Chithreks?" Ben's face darkened. "Intelligence suggests they're providing communication support to both the Vorthaks and Zeltharians, helping them coordinate their attacks." Jake studied the reports for a while, then looked up at Ben. "What would you do if you were in command of our defense forces?" Ben was quiet for a moment. "That's not my decision to make, Jake. I'm just here to provide information and advice." "I'm asking for your advice." Ben looked at the star charts again. "If it were up to me, I'd send a clear message. Hit them hard and fast before they can organize a full attack on our colonies. But that's not the human way, is it? We prefer to talk things out." Jake nodded slowly. "Yes, we do. But talking only works when the other side is willing to listen." When they arrived at the council station, Jake could feel the tension in the air. The emergency session was packed with delegates from dozens of species, all talking loudly and arguing with each other. The human delegation took their usual seats and waited for the meeting to begin. Elder Zorith called the session to order, and Jake stood up to present the human case. He had prepared his presentation carefully, with clear evidence of every attack, every violation of council law, every act of aggression against human civilians. Honored delegates, Jake began, his voice calm and professional. We come before you today with serious concerns about the safety of human citizens in the disputed border systems. He activated the holographic display in the center of the chamber. Images of destroyed ships filled the air, along with detailed reports of each attack. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. This is the cargo vessel Bright Hope, Jake said, pointing to the wreckage. It was carrying medical supplies to the colony on New Terra when it was attacked by 3 Vorthak warships. All 15 crew members were killed. The Vorthak delegate, Seth Carr, stood up immediately. That ship was trespassing in Vorthak space, he hissed. It refused to stop when ordered to do so. Jake remained calm. According to Council navigation charts, the ship was in neutral space, and even if it had been in disputed territory, attacking an unarmed civilian vessel violates multiple Council treaties. The presentation continued for an hour. Jake showed evidence of 47 separate attacks, each one carefully documented, with sensor logs, witness statements, and physical evidence. The pattern was clear. Human civilians were being systematically targeted by hostile alien forces. When Jake finished, the chamber was quiet for a moment. Then Crixtel, the Zeltharian delegate, stood up. The humans are exaggerating these incidents, he said, his claws clicking together. These so-called attacks are nothing more than normal security procedures. If human ships would follow proper protocols, there would be no problems. Several other delegates murmured agreement. Jake felt a flash of anger but kept his voice steady. Delegate Crixtel, are you saying that the murder of 138 innocent civilians is justified by security concerns? I'm saying that humans who venture into disputed territory do so at their own risk, Crixtel replied. Perhaps they should stay in their own systems where they belong. The Chithrex representative Buzzik added his buzzing voice to the discussion. The humans always complain about everything. They act like victims, but they are really trying to steal territory that belongs to other species. Jake looked around the chamber at the faces of the other delegates. Some looked uncomfortable with the evidence he had presented, but others seemed to agree with the hostile comments. He realized that no matter how much evidence he showed, some species would never accept that humans had a right to exist peacefully in the galaxy. Lisa Martinez watched her boss carefully. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight tightening around his eyes. Jake was still being diplomatic, but she knew him well enough to see the anger building underneath. Admiral Ben Carter sat perfectly still, but his hands were no longer folded calmly on his lap. They were flat on the table, and Lisa could see the muscles in his forearms were tense. Ben was a professional soldier, and he was clearly having trouble staying quiet while listening to aliens justify the murder of human civilians. Elder Zorith called for order as the arguing grew louder. Various delegates were shouting at each other, some supporting the humans and others defending the attackers. In the middle of it all, the 3 humans sat quietly, waiting for their chance to respond. Finally, the chamber grew quiet enough for Jake to speak again. He stood up slowly, and Lisa noticed that his diplomatic smile was gone. His face was serious, almost stern. Honored delegates, he said, and his voice carried clearly through the chamber. We have presented clear evidence of systematic attacks on human civilians. We have shown that these attacks violate Council law and basic standards of civilized behavior. We are asking the Council to take action to protect innocent people. Seth Carr stood up again. And what if we refuse? What will the weak humans do then? File more complaints, show us more pictures? The chamber fell silent. It was a direct challenge, the kind that usually led to threats and ultimatums from other species. Everyone waited to see how the humans would respond. Jake looked at Seth Carr for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet, but somehow it seemed to fill the entire chamber. We hope it won't come to that, Delegate Seth Carr. We truly hope that the Council will choose to do the right thing. And if we don't? Seth Carr pressed. Jake was quiet for several seconds. Lisa could see him thinking, weighing his words carefully. When he finally spoke, there was something different in his voice. Something cold. Then we will have to reconsider our approach to galactic diplomacy. The words seemed harmless enough, but something about the way Jake said them made the chamber grow very quiet. Even Sethkar seemed to sense that something had changed. Elder Zorth called for a recess, and the delegates began to file out of the chamber. As the humans gathered their materials, Zorth approached them. The emergency alert came at 3 in the morning, Earth time. Lisa Martinez was asleep in her apartment when her communicator started beeping with the urgent tone that meant something terrible had happened. She rolled out of bed and grabbed the device, her heart already racing. The message was short and devastating. Research vessel Explorer's Hope destroyed in deep space. No survivors. All hands lost. Lisa stared at the words on the screen, not wanting to believe what she was reading. Explorer's Hope was Helen's ship. Her little sister had been working on that research project for 2 years, studying ancient alien ruins in the outer systems. Helen had been so excited about her work, so proud of the discoveries her team was making. Lisa's hands shook as she called up the full report. The details were worse than she had feared. 3 Vorthak heavy cruisers had surrounded the unarmed research vessel and opened fire without warning. The attack had been captured by a deep space monitoring station, and the recording left no doubt about what had happened. It was cold-blooded murder. 47 people had died. Scientists, technicians, support staff. Helen had been the lead researcher on the project. Her 6-year-old daughter Sophie had been with her, part of the civilian family program that let researchers bring their children on long missions. Both were gone now, vaporized along with the ship. Lisa sat on her bed and cried for the first time in years. She cried for her sister, for little Sophie, for all the innocent people who had died simply because they were human. She cried until there were no tears left, and then she got dressed and went to work. There was a council session in 6 hours, and she had a job to do. When she arrived at the government building, she found Jake Harrison already in his office. He was sitting at his desk, staring at the same report she had read. His face was very pale, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked old. "I'm sorry, Lisa," he said quietly when she walked in. "I know how much Helen meant to you." Lisa nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She sat down across from his desk and tried to pull herself together. "What happens now?" Jake looked at her for a long moment. "Now we go to the council one more time. We present the evidence. We ask for justice. And if they refuse?" Jake's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, something cold and final. "Then we stop asking." The council chamber was packed when the emergency session began. News of the attack had spread quickly, and delegates from every major species had come to see what would happen. Some looked genuinely concerned about the escalation of violence. Others seemed almost eager to see how the humans would react. Jake walked to the center of the chamber with the same calm dignity he had always shown. Lisa followed behind him, carrying the evidence files. Admiral Ben Carter took his usual seat. But today he was not alone. 3 other human military officers sat with him, all wearing their dress uniforms with ribbons and medals that spoke of battles fought in distant places. Elder Zorth called the session to order, and Jake activated the holographic display. The image that filled the air above the chamber was devastating. It showed the Explorer's Hope, a small white ship surrounded by the massive dark hulks of 3 Vorthak cruisers. "Honored delegates," Jake began, and his voice was steady despite everything that had happened. "At 03:47 hours yesterday, the human research vessel Explorer's Hope was destroyed by Vorthak military forces. All 47 people aboard were killed." The recording began to play. The chamber watched in silence as the 3 alien warships opened fire on the defenseless research vessel. The attack lasted less than 3 minutes. When it was over, there was nothing left but floating debris and expanding clouds of gas. Jake let the recording play twice more before turning off the display. The chamber was completely silent. The Explorer's Hope was conducting scientific research in neutral space. Jake continued. It carried no weapons. It posed no threat to anyone. The people aboard were civilians, scientists, technicians, and their families. Among the dead was Dr. Helen Martinez, a brilliant researcher who had dedicated her life to understanding alien cultures. Also killed was her 6-year-old daughter, Sophie. Lisa felt tears running down her face, but she didn't try to stop them. Let the aliens see what their actions had cost. Let them see the human price of their political games. Delegate Sethkar stood up immediately. The research vessel was trespassing in space claimed by the Vorthak hegemony, he declared. It refused multiple orders to leave the area. Jake looked at him with an expression that made several nearby delegates step back. Delegate Sethkar, are you seriously claiming that the murder of children is justified by territorial disputes? I am saying that species who enter Vorthak space without permission do so at their own risk, Sethkar replied. Perhaps humans should teach their children to stay where they belong. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Even by the standards of galactic politics, the comment was incredibly cruel. But Jake didn't react with anger. Instead, he simply nodded as if Sethkar had just confirmed something important. Krixtel, the Zeltharian delegate, decided to make things worse. The humans are always crying about their losses, he said, his claws clicking together. Perhaps, if they weren't so weak, they could defend themselves better. Buzzik, the Chithrax representative, added his buzzing voice. The humans should abandon the outer systems if they cannot handle the dangers there. No one is forcing them to explore where they are not wanted. Jake stood quietly through all of this. He didn't argue. He didn't present counter-evidence. He didn't make threats. He just listened to alien after alien justify the murder of human civilians, including a 6-year-old child. Lisa watched her boss with growing alarm. She had expected him to fight back, to argue, to demand justice. Instead, he seemed to be getting calmer by the minute. His face showed no emotion at all. His hands were steady. His breathing was even. It was like watching someone shut down all their feelings and become a machine. Admiral Ben Carter and his officers were also perfectly still. They sat like statues, their faces showing nothing. But Lisa could see something in their eyes that made her stomach clench with fear. It was the look of professional soldiers watching their enemies make fatal mistakes. Elder Zorith tried to restore order to the chamber. Delegates, please. We must approach this tragedy with appropriate seriousness. What tragedy? Asked another Vorthak representative. 47 humans died. In a galaxy of trillions, this is nothing. Why should we care about such a small number? The chamber fell silent again. The casual dismissal of human life was shocking even to species that had no love for humanity. Several delegates looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up to object. Jake Harrison stood in the center of it all, surrounded by aliens who had just made it clear that human lives meant nothing to them. He looked around the chamber slowly, meeting the eyes of delegate after delegate. When he spoke, his voice was very soft. I want to make sure I understand the council's position, he said. You are telling me that the murder of 47 innocent people, including children, is acceptable because they were human. We are telling you that actions have consequences, Sethkar replied. Humans who venture into dangerous space must accept the risks. Jake nodded slowly. I see. And there will be no investigation of this attack? No punishment for the murderers? No protection for human civilians in the future? Elder Zorith looked around the chamber hopefully, but no one spoke up for the humans. The silence stretched on for long minutes. Finally, Jake smiled. It was the same diplomatic smile he had worn for 50 years of council meetings, but somehow it looked different now, colder, more final. Thank you, honored delegates, he said, politely. You have made your position very clear. We will inform our government of the council's decision. He turned to leave, and Lisa and the military officers stood to follow him. As they walked toward the exit, Jake paused and looked back at Elder Zorith. Elder, I want you to know that humanity has always valued its relationship with the galactic community. We have tried very hard to be good neighbors and responsible citizens. We have followed your laws, respected your customs, and shown patience when others have not shown us the same courtesy. Zorith nodded uncertainly. Yes, Ambassador. Your people have been model galactic citizens. Jake's smile grew a little wider. We have indeed, but I think our approach to galactic relations is about to change significantly. He turned and walked out of the chamber, followed by his team. The delegates watched them go, many looking confused by Jake's calm reaction. They had expected anger, threats, demands for revenge. Instead, the humans had simply listened, thanked them politely, and left. Elder Zorith remained in his chair long after the other delegates had gone. Something about Jake's final words bothered him deeply. The human ambassador had sounded almost grateful, like the council had just given him permission to do something he had been waiting to do for a very long time. Outside the chamber, Jake stopped and turned to Admiral Carter. "Ben, I need you to send a message to Earth. Top priority. Eyes only for the President and the Joint Chiefs." "What's the message?" Ben asked. Jake looked back at the chamber where 47 human lives had just been dismissed as meaningless. "Tell them that diplomatic solutions have been exhausted." 3 days passed after the emergency council session, and the galaxy felt strangely quiet. Trade ships moved along their normal routes. Military patrols followed their usual patterns. Diplomatic messages flowed between worlds as they always had. But something was different. Those who knew how to look could see the signs. Human civilian ships were heading home. All of them. The cargo vessels, the passenger liners, the research ships, even the small private craft owned by human traders and explorers. They were all moving toward human space with unusual speed. Some alien captains reported seeing human ships that seemed to be in a great hurry, but when they tried to contact them, the humans would only say they had urgent business at home. The council station was buzzing with rumors. Some delegates said the humans were preparing to abandon the galaxy entirely, giving up their colonies and retreating to their home systems. Others whispered that humanity was planning something big, but no one could agree on what it might be. Elder Zorith sat in his private office, staring out at the stars through his large window. He had been trying to contact Ambassador Harrison for 2 days, but the human embassy said Jake was unavailable. The other human diplomats had also vanished, claiming they had been called back to Earth for urgent consultations. The old alien felt a deep sense of unease. In his long life, he had seen many species react to tragedy and humiliation. Some responded with immediate violence, others retreated into isolation. A few simply gave up and faded away. But the humans were doing something different. They were being quiet. Too quiet. His assistant knocked on the door. "Elder Zorith, the Council is receiving an urgent transmission from human space. They say it's for all member species." Zorith felt his heart skip a beat. "Put it through to the main chamber. Call an emergency session." Within an hour, the Council chamber was packed with delegates from across the galaxy. Everyone had heard about the mysterious human transmission, and curiosity was running high. Some species brought their military advisors, sensing that something important was about to happen. The main display screen flickered to life, showing a stark military briefing room that no one had ever seen before. The walls were covered with star charts and tactical displays showing ship movements across the galaxy. Standing at attention beside the displays was Admiral Ben Carter, but he was no longer wearing his ceremonial uniform. Instead, he wore what looked like actual combat gear, with body armor and weapons that seemed far more advanced than anything the Council had seen before. Behind him stood Commander Amy Brooks, another human military officer that few aliens had ever encountered. She was operating a complex computer system that showed real-time positions of what appeared to be hundreds of ships moving through space. Then Ambassador Jake Harrison stepped into view, and the chamber fell silent. The diplomatic smile was gone. The friendly manner was gone. Even his clothes were different. Instead of his usual business suit, he wore what looked like a military uniform, dark blue with silver insignia that sparkled under the lights. "Esteemed council members," Jake began, and there was something in the way he said the word esteemed that made it sound like an insult. "For 50 years, humanity has operated under what we call polite mode in our interactions with the galactic community. This protocol has now been officially disabled." The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. Several delegates shouted questions at the screen, but Jake continued speaking as if he couldn't hear them. 3 days ago, the Galactic Council was presented, with clear evidence of systematic attacks on human civilians. 47 innocent people, including children, were murdered by Vorthak military forces. When we asked for justice, we were told that human lives have no value. The tactical display behind Jake lit up with moving dots of light. Red dots representing hostile forces, blue dots representing something else. There were a lot of blue dots, far more than anyone had expected. The Vorthak hegemony has committed acts of piracy and murder against human civilians, Jake continued. The Zeltharian Empire has engaged in economic warfare against human colonies. The Chithrex Collective has provided material support to these hostile actions. As of this moment, humanity considers itself at war with all three powers. The chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates jumped to their feet, shouting questions and demands. Some species representatives looked terrified, while others seemed angry or confused. Through it all, Jake's voice remained calm and steady. "We are not asking for council approval," he said, his words cutting through the noise. "We are not seeking mediation. We are not requesting assistance. We are informing you that justice will be served." Admiral Carter stepped forward, and the tactical display zoomed in on specific star systems. Human defense fleets are already en route to Vorthak space. Zeltharian trade convoys are being interdicted as we speak. Chithrex hive worlds are now under complete blockade. The display showed the movement of human forces in real time. Fleets of ships that the Council had never known existed were moving across the galaxy with frightening speed and precision. The numbers were staggering: hundreds of warships, thousands of support vessels, and what appeared to be entire battle groups, designed for different types of warfare. "Any species that interferes with these operations will be considered hostile," Jake added. "Any government that provides aid to our enemies will be treated as an enemy. Any military force that stands in our way will be destroyed." Delegate Seth Carr, the Vorthak who had been so dismissive of human deaths, stood up and pointed at the screen. "You cannot do this. The Council will not allow it. You are violating every treaty and law of civilized space." Jake turned to look directly at the Vorthak representative. His expression was completely cold, showing no emotion at all. "Delegate Seth Carr, your government murdered 47 innocent human beings, including a 6-year-old child. Your exact words were that humans should teach their children to stay where they belong. You made it clear that you consider human lives worthless." The chamber had grown quiet, everyone listening to the exchange. "Well," Jake continued, "we have decided to teach you what human lives are actually worth. The lesson begins now." The display changed to show what appeared to be a massive space battle already in progress. Vorthak ships were exploding in bright flashes of light, while human vessels moved through the combat zone like deadly shadows. The human ships were unlike anything the Council had ever seen: sleek, fast, and carrying weapons that seemed to tear through alien armor like paper. "The Vorthak Third Fleet engaged our forces 2 hours ago," Admiral Carter reported. "They have been completely destroyed. Casualties: 0 human ships lost, 37 Vorthak vessels destroyed. The Vorthak 4th and 5th Fleets are attempting to retreat but are being pursued by our rapid response units." The numbers were impossible to believe. Entire alien fleets being destroyed with no human losses? It had to be a mistake, or some kind of propaganda. But the video evidence was right there on the screen, showing Vorthak warships being systematically hunted down and eliminated. "This is impossible," whispered Crixtel, the Zeltharian delegate. "Your ships are small and weak. Your technology is primitive. How can you be doing this?" Jake's cold smile returned. "We allowed you to believe our technology was primitive. We allowed you to think our ships were weak. We allowed you to assume that what you saw was all we had. This was a mistake on your part." The display showed another battle, this one involving Zeltharian forces. Human ships were not just winning, they were dominating. Alien vessels that had terrorized human colonies for months were being destroyed so quickly that it looked like a computer simulation. Commander Brooks stepped forward to give another report. "Zeltharian economic centers on 12 worlds are now under cyber attack. Their banking systems have been compromised, their communications networks are down, and their industrial infrastructure is being systematically disabled. Estimated time to complete economic collapse: 6 hours." "And the Chithrex?" asked Admiral Carter. All 17 hive worlds have gone silent simultaneously. Our Psychic Warfare Division reports successful deployment of the neural disruption weapon. The Chithrex collective consciousness has been severed. Individual drones are no longer receiving instructions from their queens. The chamber was completely silent now. The aliens were beginning to understand that they were not watching a military operation. They were watching the complete destruction of 3 major galactic powers in real time. Elder Zorth finally found his voice. Ambassador Harrison, surely we can discuss this situation. There must be room for negotiation. Jake looked at the old alien with something that might have been pity. Elder Zorth, we tried negotiation for 50 years. We followed your laws, respected your customs, and showed patience when others showed us none. We asked politely for justice when our people were murdered. In response, we were told that human lives are worthless. The display showed the final destruction of a Vorthak stronghold, its defensive installations crumbling under human weapons that seemed to ignore traditional shielding and armor. You taught us that politeness is weakness, Jake continued. You taught us that patience is foolishness. You taught us that asking for justice is pointless. We have learned these lessons well. The transmission began to fade, but Jake's voice remained clear. 2 weeks later, the war was over. The council chamber looked very different now. Half the seats were empty, their former occupants having fled back to their homeworlds in terror. The delegates who remained sat in nervous silence, jumping at every sound and speaking only in whispers. The once proud gallery where hundreds of species had gathered to argue and debate now felt like a tomb. Elder Zorth sat in his chair at the front of the chamber, looking older than his centuries of age. In front of him lay reports from across the galaxy, each one telling the same impossible story. 3 of the most powerful military forces in known space had simply ceased to exist. The Vorthak hegemony was gone. Their entire fleet had been destroyed in battles that lasted mere hours. Their military bases had been reduced to floating debris. Their proud warrior culture had been crushed so completely that the survivors were broadcasting surrender messages from their homeworld, begging the humans for mercy. The mighty Vorthak Empire, which had terrorized dozens of species for generations, no longer existed as a fighting force. The Zeltharian Empire had suffered an even stranger fate. Their ships still floated in space, but they were powerless hulks drifting aimlessly through the void. Their industrial worlds had gone dark, their communication networks silent, their economy completely collapsed. Human cyber warfare specialists had somehow reached into the very heart of Zeltharian civilization and turned off the lights. The crab-like beings who had once controlled vast trade networks now sat in darkness, their technology useless, their society crumbling. But the fate of the Chithrex collective was perhaps the most disturbing of all. Their 17 hive worlds were intact, their cities undamaged, their populations alive and unharmed. But the Chithrex themselves had simply stopped. The collective consciousness that had linked billions of insect-like beings across multiple star systems had been severed by some kind of weapon that attacked the mind itself. Individual Chithrex drones wandered their cities in confusion, no longer able to hear the voices of their queens, no longer part of the great swarm intelligence that had defined their species for millions of years. The humans had not just won a war. They had rewritten the very nature of galactic conflict. They had shown that there were ways to destroy an enemy that went far beyond simple military victory. They had demonstrated technologies and capabilities that no one had imagined possible, and they had done it all without losing a single ship. The sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber, and Zorth looked up to see a familiar figure walking through the main entrance. Ambassador Jake Harrison had returned, looking exactly as he had for 50 years of council meetings. He wore his usual business suit, carried his leather briefcase, and walked with the same calm confidence he had always shown. Behind him came Lisa Martinez, once again taking her role as his assistant, and Admiral Ben Carter, back in his ceremonial uniform with its polished medals. The few remaining delegates watched in stunned silence as the human delegation took their usual seats. After everything that had happened, after the systematic destruction of 3 galactic powers, They had simply returned to their old routine as if nothing had changed. Jake opened his briefcase and pulled out his familiar folder of notes. Lisa set up her recording equipment and prepared to take minutes of the meeting. Ben sat quietly with his hands folded, watching the room with alert eyes. It was exactly like thousands of council sessions before, except for the empty seats and the fear in the air. Elder Zorith called the session to order with a voice that shook slightly. The council recognizes the human delegation. Jake stood up with the same polite smile he had worn for decades. Thank you, Elder Zorith. It's good to be back. The silence in the chamber was complete. No one seemed to know what to say or how to act. The humans appeared to be completely normal, as if the last 2 weeks of galactic warfare had been nothing more than a minor interruption in their schedule. I have some good news to report, Jake continued in his usual friendly tone. I'm pleased to announce that humanity's territorial disputes have been resolved. The conflicts in the Outer Rim systems are now over, and we look forward to peaceful development of those regions. Several delegates stared at him in disbelief. Territorial disputes resolved? The humans had just destroyed 3 entire civilizations, and Jake was talking about it like a successful business negotiation. Furthermore, Jake added, consulting his notes, we're happy to report that piracy and harassment of human civilians has ended completely. Our shipping lanes are now secure, and our colonists can go about their daily lives without fear of attack. A small delegate from the Phyrexian Republic, one of the few species that had always been friendly to humanity, raised a shaking hand. Ambassador Harrison, what happened to the Vorthak fleet? Our sensors showed massive battles, but then nothing. Jake's expression remained pleasant and diplomatic. The Vorthak government chose to engage in hostile actions against human civilians. We responded appropriately. I'm pleased to report that they have now seen the error of their ways and have agreed to cease all aggressive activities. But their entire fleet was destroyed, the Phyrexian delegate whispered. Yes, Jake agreed mildly. That was unfortunate, but necessary. We offered them many chances to resolve our differences peacefully. They chose violence instead. We simply chose to be better at violence than they were. Another delegate, this one from the aquatic sovereignty, found the courage to speak. What about the Zeltharians? Their worlds have gone dark. Their technology no longer functions. How is this possible? Jake turned to face the aquatic being with the same friendly attention he had always shown. The Zeltharian Empire engaged in economic warfare against human colonies. They used their advanced technology to disrupt our trade and harm our civilians. We decided to show them what truly advanced technology looks like. The delegate's gills fluttered nervously. But you've destroyed their entire civilization. Their people are living in darkness without power, without communication systems. They still have light from their suns, Jake pointed out reasonably. They still have food and water and shelter. They're simply living without the technology they use to harm others. Consider it a learning experience. Elder Zorith finally found his voice. Ambassador Harrison, the Chithrex Collective has ceased to function. Billions of beings are wandering their worlds without purpose or direction. What weapon could do such a thing? Jake's smile widened slightly. The Chithrex provided support to those who murdered human civilians, including children. They helped coordinate attacks on our colonies. We decided that a species with a collective consciousness might benefit from learning what individual responsibility means. You've destroyed their minds, Zorith said, his voice barely a whisper. We've given them freedom, Jake corrected. For the first time in their species' history, each Chithrex is free to think their own thoughts and make their own choices. Some might call that a gift. The chamber fell silent again. The remaining delegates were beginning to understand that they were not just dealing with a different human policy, they were dealing with a completely different kind of thinking. The humans had not simply won a war. They had redefined what victory meant. Lisa Martinez watched the faces around the chamber and felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. These aliens had dismissed human lives as worthless. They had justified the murder of her sister and little Sophie as acceptable casualties. Now they were learning what it meant to face a species that refused to accept such treatment. But she also knew that things could never go back to the way they were before. The mask was off. The galaxy now knew what humanity was capable of when pushed too far. Some species would be terrified of them forever. Others would seek to become allies out of fear rather than friendship. The age of human patience and diplomacy was over. Now then, Jake said, settling back into his chair and opening his folder. I believe we have some trade agreements to discuss. The human colonies in the outer rim systems will need new trading partners, now that the previous arrangements have been disrupted. He looked around the chamber with expectant eyes as if everything was perfectly normal. As if the systematic destruction of 3 galactic powers was just ancient history. We're particularly interested in establishing friendly relations with species that respect civilian life and believe in peaceful coexistence, Jake added. We've found that such relationships tend to be much more stable and profitable for everyone involved. The threat was polite, diplomatic, and absolutely clear. Play by the rules, treat humans with respect, and prosper. Cross the line, harm human, civilians, and face the same fate as the Vorthaxes, Eltharians, and Chithreks. Elder Zorith looked around the nearly empty chamber. So many seats that would never be filled again. So many species that had learned too late what it meant to mistake human patience for human weakness. The chair recognizes the human proposal, he said in a voice heavy with resignation and fear. Ambassador Jake Harrison smiled his diplomatic smile, the same one he had worn for 50 years of council meetings. But now everyone knew what lay beneath, and now everyone understood that humanity's famous politeness was not weakness but choice, not naivety but strategy.